A 10-year-old black girl finds a dying baby in a box behind a war zone checkpoint. She runs barefoot through the cold, begging for help, only to be turned away because of her skin and silence. One soldier breaks the rules. One choice defies the system. What happened at that hospital gate shook everything. Would you have stopped? Let us know. Where in the world are you watching from? And is it morning, afternoon, or night where you are? There were no sidewalks where Lena walked, only broken gravel, rusted cans, and the quiet crunch of her steps along the back edge of a long-forgotten bus terminal. She was 10 years old, barely the height of an old garbage bin, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big, the cuffs torn and dark with wear. The sleeves covered hands hardened by cold mornings and metal edges, and she wore them like armor as she picked through bottle caps, cans, and scraps with the quiet patience of someone who had done this many times before. Behind her, the early light struggled to push through a thick layer of dust and fog. In this part of the city, wedged somewhere between a crumbling refugee outpost and a military-controlled zone, nothing moved fast, except survival. Lena worked alone. She always had. The other kids had families, shelters, or at least someone to yell at them to come home. She didn't. Her days began with scavenging and usually ended with a stale roll of bread if she was lucky. Her world was limited to what she could carry and what others threw away. But she didn't complain. No one would listen, even if she did. That morning, as she reached behind an overturned shopping cart, something caught her attention. A sound. It wasn't loud, more like a faint hiccup or a breath that didn't know if it should keep going. She paused, the kind of sound that didn't belong in piles of rusted sheet metal and cigarette cartons. At first, she thought it was a stray animal, maybe a kitten left behind by one of the transient families that passed through. But as she stepped closer, careful not to make noise that might scare it away, the sound came again, short, sharp, and weak. She saw the box then, a cardboard crate crushed slightly on one side, tucked between a bin and a stained piece of fabric. There was no movement inside, but the sound had definitely come from there. Lena crouched slowly, knees pressing against cold concrete, and pushed the top of the box open. Inside was a baby, a real human baby. It couldn't have been more than a few days old. Its skin was pale, almost bluish around the lips, and its fists were curled close to its chest, shaking. There was no blanket, just a thin towel underneath and a scrap of cloth around the legs. Its breath came in short, fragile bursts, as if each inhale was a decision. Lena didn't move. For a second, everything inside her stopped. The wind, the dust, the cold, all of it fell silent. She had never seen a baby this small, this still, and it looked nothing like her. The baby was white, almost translucent in the morning light, and Lena's dark skin looked even darker next to the infant's ghostly chest. But none of that mattered. She moved quickly now. She pulled off her hoodie and wrapped it around the child, careful not to leave any skin exposed. She didn't think about keeping warm herself. Her hands were already numb, her breath visible. She lifted the baby gently, adjusting its head against her collarbone, the way she'd seen older women carry their siblings. She stood up, looked around, and made her decision. Barak Field Hospital was not close. Lena had only been near it once when a cousin she no longer saw was taken in after a bad fall. She remembered the guards, the loud voices in different languages, and the endless line of people waiting outside. But it was the only place she knew where sick people went. And this baby, this tiny colorless girl, didn't have time for anything else. She started running. At first, it was just a quick walk, but the urgency in her chest pushed her faster. Her breath grew louder. She held the baby tighter as she moved, the small body pressed to hers, its breath flickering against her neck like a weak candle in the wind. Every few steps, she looked down to make sure the baby was still breathing. There was no one else on the road, just burnt-out vehicles and old billboards for services that didn't exist anymore. By the time she reached the street leading to the hospital gate, her legs were shaking. The road here was smoother, but she could already see the checkpoint ahead, 2 guards standing behind a metal barrier, radios clipped to their jackets. One of them noticed her approaching and straightened. Lena slowed, trying to look calm, but her hands were shaking, and her lips had turned blue from the cold. She took a few more steps, then stopped in front of the barrier. She adjusted the hoodie tighter around the baby, then looked up. "Please," she said, voice cracking. "She's not breathing right." The guard looked at her, not the way someone looks at a child or even another person. It was the look reserved for things that complicate a quiet day. His eyes moved over her, her torn pants, her too thin shoes, her skin. Then he looked at the baby and his face changed, but not in the way Lena hoped. His brows drew together not in concern, but in calculation. "Where are your papers?" he asked. "I don't have any," Lena said. "I found her. I think she's dying." "You can't be here without identification," he said flatly. "This is a restricted facility. She's just a baby." Another voice joined in from behind the barrier. A woman, older hair pulled tightly into a bun, wearing the uniform of senior hospital staff. She looked at Lena the way one might look at a problem someone else would have to clean up. "This is a hospital, not a shelter," the woman said. "We can't admit anyone without proper process. You need to contact a social worker or bring a guardian." "She'll die," Lena whispered. Then louder, "She'll die if you don't help her." People had started to notice. A few patients standing outside the gate, a man with a clipboard, someone with a phone held low at their side. But no one moved. No one offered a hand. Lena stepped forward again, arms tightening around the tiny body wrapped in her hoodie. "Please just take her in. I'll go. Just her." The woman's face stayed cold. "We can't accept responsibility. You need to leave before we call security." Lena's knees buckled. She dropped to the ground, still holding the baby. Her voice rose, but her words stumbled. "She's not even crying anymore. Please. You can't just let her, please." The air felt heavy. For a long second, nothing happened, and then someone spoke from the side. "What's going on here?" A man in fatigues stepped out of the side lot. He wasn't tall, but he stood straight. His jacket had a small patch, United Peace Force, and his boots were caked with sand. He looked from Lena to the baby, then at the woman with the clipboard. "She found a newborn," the woman said. "No documents, no adult. She's not authorized to enter." The man stepped closer, crouched beside Lena. His voice was quieter now. "Hey," he said, "can I see the baby?" Lena nodded and peeled the hoodie open just a little. The man's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened. He reached out slowly and touched the baby's wrist. "She's cold," he said. "She's barely breathing," Lena replied, almost whispering. The man looked up again. "Open the gate," he said. The woman hesitated. "Sergeant, we can't open the gate," he repeated louder this time. "If this baby dies because of protocol, that's on you." He turned to Lena. "You're coming with me." He lifted the baby gently from her arms, cradling her in both hands like something sacred. Then he nodded toward the gate, and without waiting for permission, he walked through it. The guards didn't stop him. Lena stood slowly, her legs aching, her hoodie still hanging open like empty arms. She followed unnoticed by the staff, who now rushed toward the man with the baby. The woman in uniform stood frozen at the gate mouth tight. That was the first time Lena saw someone choose to stay instead of walk away. And that was the first time someone carried the weight she had held alone. The emergency ward of Barak Field Hospital was a narrow, overlit corridor of tension and urgency, a place where routine triage collided daily with chaos from the outside. The metal doors slammed open as Jonas strode in, a tiny infant wrapped in his arms, her limbs motionless, her chest barely rising. Behind him, Lena followed, her face pale from the cold, her clothes stiff with dust and sweat. She was too out of breath to speak. No one stopped them. The man's uniform spoke for him, dark fatigues with a United Peace Force patch on his shoulder, and the urgency in his voice left no room for questions. "We need help, now," he said firmly, approaching the first staff in sight. His voice was direct, but the strain in it was unmistakable. The baby in his arms was slipping fast. Dr. Fareed, the attending physician, moved in immediately. A man in his early 40s, lean, efficient, with calm eyes that had seen too much war and too little rest. He didn't waste time asking irrelevant questions. He looked at the infant, then to Jonas. "What happened?" Jonas answered quickly. "She was found outside. No warmth, barely breathing. Get her inside, now." A nurse opened the triage room. Dr. Fareed motioned Jonas to place the baby on the examination table. Lena hovered by the door, shaking, clutching her hands against her chest. The baby, still unnamed, still unidentified, lay limp on the table, her skin ghostly, her lips deep violet. Dr. Fareed placed a stethoscope gently on the baby's chest. No strong pulse. "Get a heating unit, we're dealing with severe hypothermia. Oxygen on standby." Another nurse brought the oxygen tube, while a third unwrapped the layers of clothing from the baby's fragile body. Her torso was dangerously cold to the touch. There was no crying, no reflex movement. Dr. Fareed's hands moved fast. He inserted a nasal cannula, connected a pulse oximeter, and adjusted a portable radiant warmer to maximum setting. "Temperatures at 30 degrees Celsius, a nurse said quickly. "Pulse ox barely registering. Keep her wrapped in heat blankets. Don't rush the rewarming or we risk cardiac arrest. Monitor for apnea." Fareed instructed, his voice calm but clipped. Jonas had stepped back by now, watching his arms folded tightly, the tension in his shoulders unreadable. Lena stood near him, not moving, not blinking. The world felt muted. The only sound was the beeping of machines and short, sharp commands from the doctor. Dr. Fareed gently began chest compressions with 2 fingers timed precisely to the infant's struggling heart. He counted silently, eyes never leaving the pale face. A nurse stood by with an IV kit carefully securing a line to the baby's tiny arm. The room was silent, except for equipment punctuated by the hiss of warm air, the rustle of sterile gloves. Minutes dragged. Child's chest rose slightly under the forced air. Her oxygen levels crept up. The color of her skin shifted slowly, delicately, from a cold, dangerous gray to a fragile, translucent pink. "Heart rate is stabilizing," one nurse said, her voice steady but cautious. Dr. Fareed continued monitoring. He didn't smile. "We're not clear yet. Keep everything in place. Let's not lose her on the rebound." Outside the room, Lena finally sat down on a bench, her hands clenched between her knees. Jonas turned to her. "Hey," he said quietly. "You did everything right. You got her here." Lena shook her head slightly. "She wasn't even moving when I found her." Jonas looked down at the floor for a moment, then back at her. "Sometimes people survive because someone else refuses to walk away." That was how Jonas introduced himself, not through title, not through rank, but through action. His name meant little in a place like this, but his presence, his decision to act when no one else would, changed everything. A former field sergeant with the Canadian Peacekeeping Forces, Jonas wasn't someone who explained himself much. He showed who he was by what he did. Dr. Fareed emerged from the triage room after 20 more minutes. His gloves were off his face, lined with fatigue. "She's stable for now," he said. Lena stood immediately. Jonas placed a reassuring hand on her back. "Her body temperature's up to 35. She's responding to heat and oxygen. She's not out of danger, but she's past the worst." Lena exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. Her hands trembled at her sides. Dr. Fareed crouched to Lena's level. "Do you know this baby's name?" Lena shook her head. "No, but can I give her one?" Fareed glanced at Jonas, who nodded. Lena hesitated, then whispered, "Her name is Mira, because it means tomorrow." Fareed smiled faintly for the first time that morning. "Then tomorrow has a chance." From that moment on, the baby was no longer just a body on a table. She was Mira. A name gave her weight in the world. It gave her a future. And for the first time in hours, the air inside Barak Field Hospital felt warmer than the wind outside. The hallway outside the emergency room smelled faintly of antiseptic and dust. The walls, a dull beige, were cracked near the baseboards, and the single flickering fluorescent light above made the whole corridor feel colder than it already was. Lena sat huddled on a hard plastic bench, her bare feet pulled up beneath her hoodie sleeves, swallowed over her hands. Her fingers still trembled, not just from the cold, but from everything. From the run, from the rejection, from the baby. She didn't know how long she'd been there, only that time wasn't moving. Not really. It was stuck between 2 heartbeats, hers and that tiny one inside the room. Jonas stood nearby, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, his eyes locked on the emergency room door. His jacket was open now, revealing a sweat-stained t-shirt and a lanyard still hanging around his neck from whatever medical checkup he'd been about to do before all this. His shoulders were tense. He hadn't said a word since they were ushered out, and Lena hadn't asked. She didn't know how. Or maybe she was afraid that if she spoke, this fragile bubble of safety they were inside might break. Finally, after what felt like a full hour, Jonas sank slowly onto the bench beside her. He didn't look at her at first. He just sighed long and deep, like he'd been holding it in since he took that first step toward the baby. "She's strong," he said quietly, more to the floor than to Lena. "She's not out of the woods. But the fact that she made it this far, she's got something in her. Something rare." Lena nodded, eyes still on the door. Then, hesitating, she turned to him and whispered, "Are you a doctor?" Jonas chuckled once, soft short. "No, not even close." "Then, why'd you help?" Her voice cracked on the last word. He finally looked at her. His eyes were tired, but clear. "Because nobody else did." Lena studied him carefully now, more curious than cautious. She saw the thin scar that ran just above his left eyebrow, the dark hollows under his eyes. The way his hands rested in his lap, fingers slightly curled, twitching from memory. I used to have a sister, Jonas said after a long pause. Little, not much older than you. When she got sick, my mom took her to a clinic, small place, underfunded. They told her to come back when she had proper papers, proper insurance. Said they couldn't treat her otherwise. He didn't need to say the rest, but he did. She didn't make it. Lena blinked, because they said no. He nodded slowly. They had policies, rules, procedures. But my sister, she had a name, a laugh. She was real, and they treated her like paperwork. Lena looked away quickly, staring at the cracked floor tile near her foot. Then, in a voice so small it almost got lost between their breaths, she said, "Do you think they'll let me see the baby again?" Jonas didn't answer right away. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, rubbing his palms together like he was trying to spark warmth. "I don't know," he admitted. "They'll try to make it complicated. That's what people do when they don't want to be responsible. But that doesn't mean we give up." Lena looked up at him. "You helped because of your sister?" Jonas nodded. "I help because I know what it feels like to be invisible, to scream and have no one hear you. You weren't supposed to be the one saving a baby today. That's not your job. That should have been ours, the grown-ups. But you did it anyway, so the least I can do is not turn away." There was a long silence after that, the kind that doesn't feel empty. It felt full of understanding. Lena shifted slightly, leaning her shoulder against his arm. Jonas didn't move away. Then softly she asked, "If I wasn't black, would they have let me in?" He didn't flinch. He didn't lie. Maybe he said. Lena didn't cry. She didn't even blink. She just nodded like it was something she already knew deep down. She had known it the moment Miriam looked at her like trash outside that gate. Jonas looked down at her. "But I did see you, and I'm not going to let them forget what you did." The door to the emergency room clicked behind them. A nurse stepped out, said something Jonas couldn't hear, and disappeared again. But it didn't matter. For now, Lena stayed quiet, her head resting lightly against his arm. Outside, the sun had begun to rise. Not that either of them noticed. The hallway outside the neonatal unit was dim and quiet, lit only by the blue-gray hue of old fluorescent panels above. Lena sat with her knees pulled to her chest, on the edge of a plastic bench, Jonas next to her elbows, resting on his thighs, hands laced tightly. They had been there for nearly an hour, neither speaking much after the first wave of relief, when the doctor told them the baby, now named Mira, was stable, but still critical. Tubes, monitors, and the low pulse of machines were the only things keeping her tiny frame from slipping away again. Lena stared at the floor tiles, her hoodie still damp from sweat and the stress of the day, while Jonas occasionally glanced down the corridor as if waiting for someone or something to bring clarity. His hands were shaking slightly, the adrenaline slowly giving way to exhaustion. Lena shifted and whispered mostly to herself, "They won't take her away, right?" Jonas didn't answer right away. He wanted to say no. He wanted to promise. But the truth sat heavy in his throat. He knew how systems worked, how people fell through cracks, how intentions didn't always match outcomes. The sound of approaching heels echoed like small hammers against the sterile floor. A woman appeared, holding a clipboard and wearing a navy jacket with the emblem of the city's Child Protective Services. She looked to be in her 40s, with tired but observant eyes and hair pinned into a functional bun. Her name tag read, "Layla Hassan." "You must be Mr. Becker," she said, extending a hand to Jonas, who stood. His handshake was firm but not aggressive. "Yes, this is Lena," he replied, gesturing to the girl who looked up cautiously. Layla gave a brief nod, then crouched slightly to meet Lena's eyes. "Hi, sweetheart. Can I sit here with you?" Lena hesitated, then nodded. Layla sat beside her, leaving just enough space not to feel invasive. "I'm here regarding the baby you found," she said gently. "Can you tell me how you came across her?" Lena picked at a frayed thread on her sleeve. Her voice was almost inaudible. "I heard her. She was cold. She was crying. I didn't know what else to do." Layla nodded slowly. "And you brought her here. That was very brave." Jonas stepped forward. "She saved her life. If Lena hadn't done what she did, that baby would have died out there." Layla turned to him, voice still measured. "No one's disputing that. But there are procedures we have to follow. The baby has no identification, no legal guardian. She'll have to be taken into protective custody until a placement is found." Jonas frowned. "You mean foster care?" "Yes. And Lena, she's not in our system either. No birth certificate, no documentation." Lena's face dropped. Her eyes searched Jonas's wide with sudden fear. "They can't take her away from me," she said. "They're not sisters." Layla said gently, almost regretting her own words as soon as they left her lips. Not by law. She's mine, Lena insisted. Her voice cracked. I'm the one who held her. Jonas felt something harden in his chest. His fists clenched. This girl has been through more in one morning than most adults in a year. She carried a half-dead baby to safety because nobody else would. That counts for something. Not in a legal sense, Layla replied. I wish it did. Jonas took a breath, slow and heavy. Then I'll step forward. I'll take responsibility for both. Layla blinked. That's not how this works. I don't care how it works, Jonas said. Start the process. I'll do the background checks, interviews, home studies, whatever it takes. Layla tilted her head. You're not related. You're single. You're a combat veteran. That will raise red flags. Jonas didn't flinch. I've seen what happens when people wait for perfect paperwork. They bury their children. I'm not waiting. Layla didn't answer immediately. She glanced at her clipboard, then back at Lena, whose eyes were no longer just frightened, they were burning. Not with anger, but with sheer will. The kind of look Layla had only seen in courtrooms when children fought to stay with the only person who made them feel safe. I can't promise anything, she said at last. For now, they'll stay at the hospital. I'll return in the morning with options. She turned and walked away. Her heels echoed softer this time. Jonas exhaled. Lena leaned into him, small and shaking. She didn't say yes, Lena whispered. No, Jonas replied, but she didn't say no either. That's something. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, unsure whether it was to comfort her or steady himself. Outside the window, sirens wailed in the distance, reminding them that in this city, nothing was still for long. But for now, in this quiet corridor, 2 lives had aligned, and one small flame of defiance flickered against the chill of bureaucracy. The hallway outside the neonatal unit was quieter now, almost still, but the tension hadn't left. It lingered like the dust in the corners and the scent of antiseptic clinging to the walls. Jonas stood near the door, where Mira lay, surrounded by machines, a silent guardian watching over what he could not control. Layla leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, her clipboard held loosely at her side. Her eyes weren't on him, but on something much farther away, something in her mind she wasn't ready to say out loud. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, thoughtful. We found her, the mother, about an hour ago. Jonas turned slowly, his shoulders still tight from the weight of waiting, where he asked, his tone guarded, not angry, but wary. Layla pushed away from the wall and approached, her voice flat, but not unkind. Abandoned warehouse 2 blocks east, near the train line, no heat, no plumbing. A temporary squat spot used by people who get kicked out of the shelters after curfew. She paused, then added, she's young, 19. Her name's Samira Dowett. She hesitated before continuing. She's not in good shape. No ID, no relatives on record, no known income. Says she came from the Central Refugee Corridor from Sector 5. Jonas's brows furrowed. Sector 5. That was the strip that got hit hardest when the Eastern ceasefire failed 3 months ago. Whole blocks flattened. Half the zone still burned at night from unexploded fuel lines. I thought they closed Sector 5 completely, Jonas said. Layla nodded. They did. But some civilians were still there when it happened. She said she was one of them. A silence settled between them. Jonas stared down the hall, processing. Layla watched his reaction carefully, her voice softening now. She's asking to speak with someone. I thought it should be you. Jonas didn't respond right away. He glanced at the bench where Lena sat quietly, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes fixed on the glowing neonatal sign, like it was the only thing holding her together. Then he nodded once. Okay, let's go. They walked through a side hallway, narrow and dimly lit. The walls here hadn't been painted in years. The plaster peeled in places, revealing old water stains and long-dead emergency route stickers. Layla led him to a small interview room near the intake ward. A single chair sat across from a rusted table. The only window was a slot of plexiglass high above the door, letting in a thin slice of gray sky. Samira sat in the chair, her arms wrapped around herself like she was holding her ribs in place. Her skin was dry, cracked at the knuckles. Her jeans were 2 sizes too big, held up with a frayed cord, and her coat was more of a blanket missing buttons draped over her shoulders for warmth. She looked up when Jonas entered, eyes wide but guarded. Hi, she said quietly. Her voice was hoarse, like she hadn't spoken much in days. Jonas stayed standing. I'm Jonas, he said simply. I was there when the baby was brought in. Samira nodded. She seemed to search for something to say, but the silence stretched awkwardly until Layla gently broke it. "Samira, this is just a conversation. No one's here to arrest you, but we need to understand what happened. For the baby. For you." Samira nodded again. Then she licked her lips and sat a little straighter. "I didn't want to leave her. I need to say that first. I didn't just throw her away." Her voice cracked on the last word. Jonas said nothing, waiting. "I'm from Hawalti district in the old red zone. Before the tanks came through, I lived there with my mom and my little brother. I was still in school. We had a garden. It wasn't much, but it was safe," she said. Her eyes glazed slightly as the memories returned. "Then the corridor opened. They said we had to evacuate. We ran, but my mom didn't make it. She got caught in the crossfire on the third day." She swallowed. "I tried to keep my brother safe, but he got sick. No medicine, no food. No one would take us in because we weren't registered evacuees. He died a month before I came here." Her voice faltered. "I buried him myself." Layla's hand froze on the edge of the clipboard. Jonas remained still, jaw clenched. Samira kept talking like she had to empty everything out or it would crush her. "I ended up in the makeshift refugee zone behind the checkpoint. It was overcrowded. Men kept offering food if I'd keep them company. I was 17. I said no for a while. Then I said yes. It didn't feel like a choice anymore." Her voice dropped lower. "I never even knew the baby's father's name." She paused to wipe her eyes with the sleeve of her coat. Her fingers were trembling now. "I didn't go to a clinic. I didn't register. If they knew I was pregnant without ID, they'd split me from the camp. I stayed hidden, gave birth alone in an abandoned shipping crate behind the station. I almost died. I thought she might too." Her voice dropped to a whisper, but she didn't. She was small, but she screamed. And that scream was the only reason I knew she was real. Jonas sat now, carefully folding his hands in front of him. He spoke gently, not like a soldier, but like a person trying to understand. "Why leave her in a box?" Samira looked up, eyes bloodshot but unflinching. "Because I was cold. I was bleeding. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I walked to the shelter with her in my arms, and they turned me away. Said no infants without family ID. I sat outside for hours. She stopped crying. I wrapped her in the only thing I had. I put her where I thought someone would find her. I didn't walk away because I didn't love her. I walked away because I thought she'd have a better chance without me." Her hands shook now. "I didn't think I mattered enough to help." Layla moved, then slowly, placing a small packet of tissues on the table between them. Samira didn't take one. She just stared at the packet like it was something precious she hadn't earned. Jonas leaned forward slightly. "You're wrong," he said. "You do matter. You mattered the second you carried her through those nights. You mattered the second you decided she deserved a chance. And you still matter now. But if you really believe she'll be safer away from you, then let's make sure she stays with someone who knows what it means to fight for her." Samira looked up again. Her eyes locked on his. "You'll keep her safe?" she asked. Jonas nodded. "Me and Lena. She's the one who found Mira. She didn't let go." Something inside Samira seemed to break, but not in a way that shattered her. More like something uncoiled, a knot of guilt loosening slightly. She reached slowly into her coat and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. It was dirty, frayed at the edges. She pushed it across the table. "This is all I had for her. I wrote it before I left her. I didn't want her to think I never cared." Layla unfolded the paper and read the single line written in shaky handwriting. "Tell her I loved her. I just couldn't love myself." Jonas exhaled slowly. His voice was quiet now. "She'll know, I promise." Layla reached for her clipboard again, this time with a different form. "If you're ready, we can make it official," she said. "We'll need your signature to release all guardianship rights." Samira nodded. She signed without hesitation. When it was done, she pushed the clipboard back and looked down at her lap, her voice barely a whisper. "She deserves a name." Jonas nodded. "She has one. Mira. Lena gave it to her." Samira closed her eyes. "That's a good name. It sounds like something that survives." When Jonas left the room, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt heavy, but grounded. The truth of what had happened, the chain of suffering that led to a baby in a box, wasn't just tragic. It was structural. It was built into the silence of shelters that turned people away, the checkpoints that judged by skin, the paperwork that pretended humanity only started when a form said so. Back in the hallway, Lena stood as soon as she saw him. Her face was anxious, her arms folded tightly over her chest. Is she bad?" she asked. Jonas shook his head. "No, just lost. Just hurt. Like a lot of people." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, but she signed the paper. "Mira's with us now." Lena looked down, her breath shaky. Then slowly she smiled, small, unsure, but real. Outside, the city was still broken, still cold, but somewhere between one room and another something had started to heal. The neonatal unit was quieter now. Mira was still inside, wrapped in a cocoon of wires and warmth, her breath steadier, her color returning bit by bit, like light slowly bleeding into a dim room. She was not out of the hospital, not yet, but she was healing. The worst had passed. Her tiny chest rose and fell in soft, measured intervals, a rhythm that had once teetered on the edge of silence. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting the heat, whispering updates to the doctor. They no longer looked worried. They looked focused. And that in itself was a kind of miracle. Jonas stood beside, the glass hands in his pockets, his eyes locked on her like she might disappear if he blinked. He didn't speak, didn't shift, didn't move even when the nurse brushed past him to enter the room. Behind him, Lena sat on a plastic chair, with her knees pulled to her chest again, watching quietly, her eyes darting from Mira to Jonas, and back, her arms wrapped tightly around her stomach like she was trying to hold herself in place. She didn't ask to go inside. She had already been told it wasn't allowed. But she stayed close, her silence saying more than any protest could. Layla returned just after lunch, a folder under her arm, her jacket slightly wrinkled and her eyes heavier than the night before. She nodded at Jonas but didn't interrupt. She waited until he turned just slightly enough to acknowledge her presence. "We have to talk," she said quietly. Jonas didn't move from the glass. What now? Layla sighed. About next steps. For both of them. Jonas finally turned slowly, crossing his arms as he faced her. "You already have my answer." Layla gave a small, tired smile. "And I'm not here to talk you out of it, but I need to make sure you understand what you're walking into." Lena looked up from her chair, suddenly alert. Jonas glanced at her briefly, then stepped away from the window, guiding Layla toward the corner of the hallway. His voice was low but firm. "She needs a home. They both do. I have one. It's not big, it's not new, but it's mine, and it's safe." Layla opened the folder, pulling out a few forms already pre-filled with his name in block letters. "We've started the emergency care petition, but the background process isn't quick. You'll need a home assessment references financial verification." Jonas cut in, not angry, but focused. "I've done paperwork before. I can read. I can fill things out. Just tell me what I need to do." Layla studied him for a moment, as if trying to read what kind of man he was beneath the uniform, beneath the exhaustion and blunt delivery. "You're not related by blood," she said. "You're single. You're not even from here. That's going to raise eyebrows." Jonas met her gaze head on. "So everything about this raises eyebrows. A 10-year-old saving a baby. A newborn left in a box. A refugee girl with no name in the system. We're already past the part where this fits on a form." Layla didn't argue. She just handed him the pen. "Then start with this. Emergency guardianship request. If it clears, they stay with you until a long-term arrangement is approved." Jonas took the pen, signed the first page without hesitation, then flipped to the next. "She's not paperwork to me," he said, his voice quiet. "Neither of them are." Behind them, Lena had stood up. She didn't say anything, but walked closer, standing next to Jonas, almost touching his arm. Layla glanced at her, then softened. "You'll both have to meet with a social worker regularly, and the home needs to be safe, child-appropriate, inspected." Jonas gave a short nod. "It will be." He paused. "It's not ready yet, but it will be." Layla tilted her head. "Do you need help getting it in shape?" Jonas hesitated, then shook his head. "No, this is something I need to do myself." That evening, after ensuring Lena was settled in the hospital's temporary family lounge with a blanket tea and the assurance that Mira was doing well, Jonas left for the first time in nearly 2 days. He didn't go far. Just across town to a quiet building where his apartment sat untouched, layered with dust and silence. He unlocked the door slowly. The hallway smelled stale, the windows fogged from months of disuse. The apartment was small, 1 bedroom, 1 worn couch, 1 kitchen that still had a half-full box of cereal on the counter, but it was his. He walked through it like a soldier returning to familiar terrain, pausing only briefly before he got to work. First, he cleared the space. The old couch was pushed aside, the clutter swept into bags. He opened every window. Then he started cleaning. The kind of cleaning that meant something. He scrubbed the floors, wiped the walls, emptied drawers, disinfected corners. He pulled out old furniture, wiped dust off picture frames, then went to a hardware store before it closed and bought a small can of soft white paint. By midnight, he had painted the corner of the bedroom where he planned to put the crib. He didn't have a crib yet, but he would. He left space by the window where the sunlight might reach. He put a folded blanket on the floor temporarily and marked the wall with a pencil tiny faint measurements. Above the space, he nailed a single line of text he had printed from an old printer that nearly jammed. The paper wasn't perfect. The font was plain, but the message was clear. He taped it carefully, then stepped back to read it aloud softly. Home is where people choose to stay together. The next morning, Jonas returned to the hospital early. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands still speckled with dried paint, but he carried a small paper bag with 2 cheese rolls and a plastic container of fruit. Lena was already awake. She had slept in the lounge chair again, curled into her self hoodie pulled tight around her arms. When she saw him, she sat up quickly, blinking hard. "Is she okay?" she asked. Jonas nodded. "Still stable. They said she gained a little weight overnight." He handed her the bag. "You need to eat something." Lena opened it, her hand still shaking slightly. "Where did you go?" Jonas hesitated for just a second. "I had to clean something." Lena looked at him. She didn't press. Instead, she nodded and took a bite of the roll. Later that day, Layla returned with a different tone. She had a list of upcoming appointments, a home inspection scheduled for Thursday, a social worker visit the following week, and a request for Jonas to submit a personal statement about his intent to care for the children. She spoke quickly, efficiently, but there was a lightness to her step now, like she had decided something quietly within herself. When Jonas asked if she had heard anything from Samira, she paused. She left the shelter, didn't leave contact info, but she signed everything. Full consent. It's final. Jonas nodded slowly. "Thank you." Layla looked at him, then at Lena, who was now coloring quietly with a pen she had borrowed from a nurse. "Whatever happens next, Layla said they're lucky to have you." Jonas didn't smile. He didn't know how, but he answered honestly, "I'm lucky to have them too." That night, when Jonas stood by the nursery window, again watching Mira sleep beneath the soft pink glow of the heater, Lena stood beside him. She looked up. "What if she forgets me?" she asked. Jonas shook his head. "She won't." Lena's eyes stayed on the baby. "I don't want her to think I left." Jonas put a hand on her shoulder. "Then stay. Every day you're here, you remind her." Lena didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, "Okay." The word was so soft it could have been missed, but he heard it, and that was enough. Outside, the wind picked up again, sweeping through the alleys and old bus yards of the city. But inside the hospital, in that moment, 3 people who had no blood connection were building something stronger than law. They were choosing together to stay. Jonas had expected the trip to the supply district to be simple, quick, a soft return to something resembling normal, the kind of errand people did when they weren't running from rules, border checks, or freezing newborns back to life. The neighborhood near the east checkpoint had reopened, only recently cleared of debris after the ceasefire, its streets still marked with soot trails from drone strikes that had ended not even 2 months earlier. Shopkeepers had begun to rehang metal signs over bent shutters. Children kicked deflated balls between sandbag barriers. The silence of post-conflict still hung heavy in the air, but survival was loud in small, determined ways. Jonas had dressed in his civilian jacket, Mira strapped gently against his chest in a padded sling. Her breathing was soft, steady, her cheeks no longer gray with cold, pressed against the warmth of his chest as she slept. Lena walked beside him, arms tucked inside a hand-me-down coat that still carried the faint scent of hospital disinfectant and fresh paint from their apartment. She kept close, not holding his hand, but near enough to feel tethered. They didn't speak much as they walked. The weight of the past week of signatures, of courtrooms, of the quiet finality of Samira's goodbye still lingered between them. Earlier that morning, Mira had been discharged from Barak Field Hospital. After 8 days in neonatal care, her condition had stabilized. Her breathing was now even. Her temperature had held steady through the night. The monitors no longer beeped warnings. The oxygen had been removed 3 days prior, and she had begun to suckle from a bottle without assistance. Dr. Fareed himself had walked Jonas through the paperwork. "She's strong," he had said with a tired but genuine smile. "And she wouldn't have made it if either of you had arrived even 5 minutes later." Lena had sat quietly in the corner during the final checkup, watching every movement, every heartbeat on the screen, like a guardian on duty. When the nurse handed Mira over, wrapped in the very same hoodie Lena had used to save her life, the girl didn't speak. She just held her breath for a second, then finally let it out, like she was allowing herself to believe it was real. Now they were trying to do something ordinary. Pick up formula, find wipes, maybe even something soft to wrap Mira in for their first night at home together. They reached the pharmacy without incident. It was one of the few still open in the district, operated by a Kurdish couple who had stayed behind when others fled. Shelves were half-stocked. Baby formula sat beside wound dressings. Every transaction was recorded by hand on paper slips. The digital system still down across most of the region. Jonas waited as Lena studied the pacifier section with quiet concentration, Mira's tiny fingers twitching against his chest. For a moment, it felt almost like peace. Then it happened. A voice sharp and accusatory cut through the low murmur of the shop. "Excuse me, is that your baby?" The woman stood near the register, middle-aged, light-skinned, wearing a beige coat with a red ID armband that marked her as a local security volunteer. Her accent was Israeli, clipped and firm. Jonas turned slowly. "Yes," he said evenly, "she's with me." The woman didn't smile. Her eyes narrowed as they swept from him to Mira's pale face, then to Lena's darker skin and tightly braided hair. "She doesn't look like yours. Neither of them do." Jonas's jaw tightened. "They're mine," he said simply, "legally. I have the documents." The woman didn't move. Her eyes flitted to the pharmacist, who now looked away, busying himself with a drawer. "I think we need to call someone, just to make sure everything's in order." She reached for her phone. Lena had stopped moving. She stood completely still, her hand frozen halfway toward a box of wipes. Her eyes darted from the woman to Jonas. She didn't speak, but her face said everything. Not again. Jonas took a deep breath, centering himself before his voice broke. "You don't need to call anyone. We're not doing anything wrong." The woman stared. "If you're so sure, you won't mind waiting for verification." Jonas didn't answer. He didn't want to make a scene. Mira stirred slightly, her lips parting in a soft cry. He bounced her gently, murmuring low to calm her. It didn't work. The military police arrived 6 minutes later. 2 officers in UN blue uniforms with Arabic and Hebrew patches on their sleeves stepped into the shop. Their weapons weren't drawn, but their eyes were alert. One of them, a young man with tired eyes and a visible wedding ring, approached Jonas. "Sir, we received a report of a suspected abduction. May we see your identification and the child's custody papers?" Jonas kept his voice calm. "It's in my inside pocket." "May I reach for it?" The officer nodded. Jonas handed over the folded documents, watching the man's fingers unfold them slowly. The officer read through silently, lips moving as he traced the lines. Then he turned to Lena. "And the girl," Jonas answered. "She's under temporary guardianship pending full status review. She's not on paper yet, but she was the one who found the baby." The officer's eyes softened just slightly. He turned back to his partner, who nodded. "The papers are clean," the second officer confirmed. "No alerts, no inconsistencies." Jonas exhaled through his nose. Mira let out a soft sound against his chest. The first officer turned back to the woman. "There's no issue here, ma'am." The woman didn't respond immediately. Her lips tightened, but she didn't apologize. She turned and left the store without another word. The officers stayed a moment longer. One looked at Lena, then back at Jonas. "You okay?" he asked. Jonas nodded, but his voice was hoarse. "We're used to it." The officer didn't reply to that. He just gave a short nod and followed his partner out. The door closed behind them. The silence that remained was cold, not from temperature, but from what had just passed between strangers. Jonas turned to Lena, but she had already walked to the far end of the aisle. Back turned, staring at the packages of baby lotion like they were suddenly unfamiliar. He approached quietly. "You all right?" he asked. She didn't look up. "They thought you stole her," she said. Her voice was flat. "And they looked at me like I helped." Jonas didn't respond immediately. He didn't want to lie. "Yeah," he finally said. "They did." Lena turned then. Her eyes burned, but not with tears. They were sharp, steady. "If I was white, would they have called them?" Jonas didn't speak. He didn't shake his head or soften the truth. "Maybe not," he said. "Probably not." Lena nodded slowly. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew it when they looked at me at the hospital, when they looked at her, like we were in the wrong place, like we don't fit together." Jonas crouched so they were eye level. He reached out not to grab, just to offer presence. "Listen to me," he said. "We do fit together. I don't care what they see when they look. I care what you see, and what she sees when she wakes up, and we're both still here." Lena swallowed hard. Her fingers were curled into fists at her sides. "I'm tired of proving I belong," she said. "I'm tired of being the wrong color, the wrong name, the wrong paper." Jonas nodded. "Me too," he said, "but we're still here." Later on the walk home, the streets were quieter. The sun had dropped behind the ruined west side of the city, casting long shadows over broken balconies and sandbags stacked like unspoken warnings. Mira was asleep again, oblivious to what had passed her breath, warm against Jonas's chest. Lena walked a little closer this time, one hand brushing the sling as if to make sure Mira was still there. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say that hadn't already been said. When they reached the apartment, Jonas unlocked the door with his usual care. The hallway inside was dim, but warm lit by the soft battery lantern they kept on the kitchen shelf. Jonas stepped aside to let Lena enter first. She walked in, slowly shrugged off her coat, and turned toward the small crib Jonas had built by hand from salvaged planks. Mira stirred slightly as Jonas transferred her from the sling to the crib, her body curling instinctively toward the blanket Lena had chosen. Jonas stood in the doorway of the small room, watching them both. Lena sat on the floor next to the crib, one hand resting lightly on the frame. She didn't speak for a long time. Then finally she said, "I don't want to hide. Not in stores. Not on the street. Not here." Jonas nodded. "Then we won't." His voice was low but certain. "We don't hide. We build. And if they look at us like we're broken, we keep showing them we're not." Lena leaned her head lightly against the side of the crib. "Family doesn't have to match," she murmured. Jonas smiled faintly, leaning against the doorframe. "No," he said. "Family just has to stay." 3 days after Mira was discharged, the story reached the world. It started as a single post, a grainy video taken outside Barak Field Hospital showing a man in military fatigues pushing through the gates with a newborn in his arms and a dark-skinned girl trailing close behind. No context, no names, just a moment frozen in motion, the kind people projected their own narratives onto. Within 24 hours, the video had over 500,000 views. By the second day, local news picked it up. Unidentified soldier rescues abandoned infant outside war zone hospital. Someone recognized Jonas, and from there it spiraled. News outlets contacted Barak Hospital. A journalist found Lena's name in the temporary intake logs. Social media latched onto the image Jonas holding Mira like something sacred, Lena looking up at him with exhaustion and trust. They called him a hero. At first, the praise didn't last. By the 4th day, counter-narratives began to emerge. Commentators questioned Jonas's background. Internet sleuths dug up his service record in Afghanistan and his discharge after a classified injury. Conservative columnists asked why a single man, unmarried, no previous parenting history was allowed to take guardianship of a white infant and an undocumented African girl without delay. They cited risk, precedent, paperwork. A prominent Israeli columnist wrote, "Compassion is noble, but so is caution. Are we truly protecting the child by placing her in the care of someone who found her on the street?" Beneath the article were hundreds of comments. Some were supportive, most were not. Jonas didn't read the articles, but Layla did. She sat in her shared office at the ministry's local field branch, back hunched, a printed copy of the article in her lap. Her inbox was flooded. 2 internal memos from headquarters were marked urgent. One demanded a reassessment of Mira's placement. The second flagged Jonas's guardianship file for review, citing public concern and potential procedural deviation. Layla read both documents twice, then slowly set them aside. Her stomach twisted. She knew what this was. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't about process. It was about optics, about control. The system didn't like being surprised by outcomes it didn't script. She stared at the screen fingers hovering over the keyboard, then pushed back from the desk and grabbed her coat. When Layla arrived at Jonas's apartment, she knocked softly. The hallway light flickered overhead. Jonas opened the door, holding a bottle in one hand, Mira bundled in a blanket across his shoulder. Her small body rose and fell with steady rhythm, a faint sigh escaping her lips. Lena sat at the table drawing shapes in the condensation of a chipped glass, her expression distant. The apartment was quiet. Jonas gave Layla a nod, then shifted Mira gently to his chest as he gestured for her to come in. She stepped inside but didn't sit. He could see it in her face. What happened? He asked, his voice steady but clipped. Layla didn't dance around it. The story blew up, she said. You're viral. Everyone has an opinion. And some of those opinions are being used as leverage. Jonas didn't blink. Define leverage. Layla exhaled. Internal Review wants to reevaluate Mira's placement. They're asking why she wasn't routed into traditional foster care, why she wasn't matched with a culturally aligned family, why Lena, an undocumented minor, is still here. Jonas's jaw tightened. His fingers moved slightly across Mira's back, calming himself more than her. You mean why she wasn't handed to someone more comfortable for them to look at? Layla didn't deny it. They're calling it a procedural irregularity. I call it a child's life being saved, Jonas snapped. They weren't there when she couldn't breathe. They weren't there when a 10-year-old ran barefoot to get her help while security refused to open the damn gate. Lena looked up at that, quietly, intently. Her eyes moved between them, her hands now folded tight in her lap. Layla held her ground. I know that. You think I don't. I was there. I've seen what this has cost you both. But this system wasn't built to accommodate truth. It was built to contain it. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. They want her reassigned. They're not saying it directly, but they're nudging the process toward reassessment. They've already compiled a list of families. Israeli citizens, upper income, clean profiles, married, certified, ready. She's not a dog up for adoption, Jonas growled. She's a person with history, with people who didn't walk away when they could have. Layla swallowed hard. I need to ask you something. Do you want to fight this? Jonas's answer came without pause. Of course I do. Because if you do, she continued, it's going to get ugly. They'll question everything. Your service history, your income, your mental health. They'll dig into Lena. Ask why she was on the streets, why she wasn't reported sooner. They'll use the press, the courts, whatever they have. Jonas looked down at Mira, then across the room to Lena, who sat frozen, her chest rising and falling with barely contained fear. He turned back to Layla. Good, he said. Let them dig. I'm not ashamed of what we are, but I won't hand her over just because she fits better on paper with someone else. That's not care. That's image control. Layla's voice lowered to a whisper. They think they're protecting her. Jonas's voice dropped just as low. They're protecting themselves. The silence in the apartment returned, but it wasn't empty. It was full of defiance, of lines being drawn in quiet ways. Layla finally stepped back toward the door. Before she left, she looked at Jonas again. You'll need more than resolve, she said. You'll need witnesses, proof, voices to vouch. Then I'll find them, he replied. I've got one who never stopped speaking. He nodded toward Lena. Lena stood up slowly. Her voice was soft but solid. I was the first one to hold her, she said. I didn't let go. Layla stared at her eyes, unreadable. Then she nodded. Once. Then maybe the world needs to hear that. As the door clicked shut behind her, Jonas sat down, slowly holding Mira close. Lena walked over and sat beside him, resting her head lightly against his arm. The apartment stayed quiet. The night outside buzzed faintly with sirens and distant traffic. But inside, the war had moved somewhere new. Not on the streets, not in the hospitals, but inside the walls of bureaucracy and headlines. And this time, they were ready. The room wasn't what Jonas expected. It wasn't grand. There were no towering columns, no raised judge's bench polished to reflect power. This courtroom, one of the many provisional tribunals set up in the aftermath of the ceasefire, was inside what used to be a post office. The walls were sand-colored and uneven. The ceiling still bore burn marks from a fire that had gutted the building during the second month of the siege. There were 20 folding chairs, 4 rows, 1 fan, and no air conditioning. The only light came from a row of cracked windows behind the judge's desk, where sunlight bled through bullet-scarred glass and laid uneven lines across the floor. But it was official. It had weight. What happened here would be recorded, would be signed, and would decide if a child got to keep the only family she knew or be sent to a different one, because the world said it fit better. Jonas sat at a plain wooden table, Mira in his arms, wrapped tightly in a knitted blanket that still smelled faintly of the NICU. Lena sat beside him, her feet barely touching the floor, hands locked between her knees, her eyes fixed on the judge's nameplate, even though she couldn't read it. Layla sat on his other side, a file folder resting on her lap lips, pursed tight. Across from them, the state's appointed representative, a woman in her early 40s with flawless posture and a thin stack of documents, adjusted her blazer and offered Jonas a tight professional nod that didn't reach her eyes. The judge entered an older man with deep wrinkles around his mouth and a slow, limping gait. He didn't look like he cared for theatrics. He sat with a sigh, adjusted his chair, and removed his glasses before scanning the room. We are here to review guardianship proceedings regarding the minor currently identified as Mira, a female infant of unknown parentage, and the role of one Mr. Jonas Becker as temporary guardian, he began. His voice was even practiced. Additionally, we will hear statements regarding the undocumented minor currently residing under Mr. Becker's care. 1. Lena, surname, unknown. The state representative stood first. She spoke smoothly, without pause or hesitation, like someone who had said these same words in a dozen hearings before. Your Honor, the ministry acknowledges Mr. Becker's well-intentioned intervention during a time of crisis. However, intention does not equate to suitability. Mr. Becker is a single man with no familial ties to the children in question. He has no history of parenting, no cultural connection to the child Mira, and resides in a transitional district still under partial reconstruction. Furthermore, the minor Lena remains without documentation, background verification, or legal identity. It is our position that while Mr. Becker's actions may be commendable, they do not constitute a long-term solution in the best interest of the children. Jonas felt his jaw lock. He didn't move. He didn't interrupt. He waited. The judge looked over to him. Mr. Becker, do you wish to respond? He stood slow and steady, keeping Mira cradled in his arms as he addressed the bench. Yes, Your Honor, I do. He didn't look at the state representative. He didn't pace. He just spoke. I found Mira the day she was dying. Not sick. Dying. Left in a cardboard box behind a burned-out depot, half frozen, barely breathing. The only reason she's alive right now is because Lena, this undocumented child no one wants to account for, wrapped her in her only piece of clothing and ran barefoot 2 kilometers to a hospital that didn't want to open its gate. He paused to glance at Lena, whose eyes hadn't left the judge. They turned her away. Told her she needed papers. Identification. An adult. She begged. I just happened to be walking by. And I didn't walk past. I broke protocol. I carried that baby through the gate because no one else would. And we didn't stop. Jonas's voice was low but clear. Since then, I've been with them. Every feeding. Every night Mira cried from stomach gas or night tremors. Every morning, Lena woke up afraid we'd be separated again. They're not my blood. But I saw them. I didn't look away. And that's what makes me a guardian. He sat slowly. The judge nodded once his face unreadable. Then, to everyone's surprise, Lena stood. She didn't wait for permission. She wasn't used to needing it. She stepped forward and spoke softly, her voice shaking at first, then rising in certainty. My name is Lena. I don't know my last name. I think I used to have one, but no one says it anymore. People call me girl, sometimes black, sometimes refugee, sometimes nothing. She shifted slightly, pulling the sleeves of her coat over her fingers. But when I found Mira, I didn't think about paper or blood. I just knew she was small and she was cold and she wasn't crying loud enough. I took her because no one else did. She looked straight at the judge, her chin lifting slightly. I was the first one to hold her. And I didn't let go. Not when they yelled at me. Not when they told me to leave. Not when the gate stayed closed. She gestured toward Jonas. He didn't walk away either. I didn't know him. But he stopped. He carried her when I couldn't anymore. He gave me his jacket. He gave Mira his voice. I don't know if that's what a family's supposed to be, but that's what we are. Layla stood slowly behind her. Her voice was quiet but firm. I've worked in this system for 16 years. I've processed over 1,000 placements. I've followed the protocol. I've watched families fall apart because we waited too long for perfect circumstances. But these 3, they are not waiting. They're already fighting like a family. And the system can't give these children what they already built themselves. There was a long silence, the kind that stretched and held. The judge leaned forward. He removed his glasses again. The court recognizes that under typical legal precedent, guardianship requires established stability, familial connection, and verified identity. But in times of displacement when documentation is scarce and social order has fractured, precedent must bend to principle. He looked at Jonas, then Lena, then Mira, now sleeping quietly in Jonas's arms. I hereby grant full guardianship of the minor Mira to Jonas Becker with temporary protective custody extended to Lena under his care. A caseworker will be assigned to assist in formal documentation for Lena's legal residency and potential future adoption, effective immediately. The gavel came down with a single sharp tap. Jonas didn't move for a second. He just breathed. Lena's hands were shaking, but she was smiling. Layla let out a long, slow breath that sounded more like a quiet thank you than relief. And just like that, the papers finally caught up to what had already been true. They were a family. Not by blood, not by birth, but by choice, by survival, by staying. The apartment smelled faintly of warm bread and clean linen. Sunlight filtered in through the slats of the old window blinds, casting soft lines across the cracked tiles of the kitchen floor. A small fan buzzed from the counter, doing its best to push the late afternoon heat into motion. Jonas stood at the sink, rinsing out the last of the bottles, sleeves rolled up past his elbows, movements slow, deliberate. The sleeves of his shirt were damp, the collar stained with baby spit and sweat, but he didn't mind. Every stain had a reason. Every mark meant Mira had eaten, had slept, had cried, had lived another day. Across the room, Lena sat cross-legged on a cushion by the window, colored pencils scattered across the floor beside her. She was working on a drawing, head-tilted brows pulled together in quiet concentration. Her hand moved carefully over the paper, slow, patient strokes. It wasn't the rushed kind of drawing she used to do on the backs of paper bags or cardboard scraps. This one had time in it. In the crib near the couch, Mira slept with one hand curled beside her cheek, her other arm resting against the side rail, as if she had claimed the space as her own. The chapped skin on her lips had healed. Her breath was slow and even. Her chest rose and fell beneath the soft cotton onesie Lena had picked out 2 days ago, the only one not donated, the one they bought new. Jonas looked over his shoulder and watched her for a moment. Not long, just long enough to count 5 breaths, then 10. He set the bottle in the drying rack, wiped his hands on a towel, and walked over to where Lena sat. She didn't look up when he sat beside her, but he could see the lines of the drawing, now 3 figures holding hands standing beneath a crooked sun. There were buildings in the background drawn in sharp angles and soft crumbles. Some looked broken, some were half-colored, but there was green poking out of the corners. Trees, new ones, a sidewalk, a bird. She was drawing hope, but not the kind that pretended nothing bad had happened. She was drawing the kind that said it happened, and we're still here. Jonas glanced at the figures. One was taller than the others. One had curly hair and dark skin. One was small, with 2 little dots for eyes and a swirl of yellow crayon above her head. "That us?" he asked quietly. Lena nodded. "Yeah." Her voice was soft, almost casual. "I wanted to draw something real, not like a fairy tale. Just us. How we look when nobody's watching." Jonas leaned back against the wall and let the quiet settle. The hum of the fan, the occasional creak of the building, the muffled sounds of construction somewhere in the next block. None of it felt urgent anymore. It was just sound. Background. They had been living in the apartment for a little over 2 weeks since the hearing. No one had come to check on them yet. No new headlines. No follow-ups. Just a caseworker scheduled for next month and a thick folder of official-looking documents sitting in a drawer Jonas kept locked, not because he didn't trust Lena, but because he didn't want those papers to define what they were building. Lena put down the pencil and looked toward Mira. "She didn't cry today," she said. Jonas smiled. "She's getting stronger." Lena nodded again, but her voice lowered. "Do you think she'll remember any of this?" He thought for a moment. "Probably not like we do. Not the cold, not the noise, not the hospitals, but I think she'll remember how she felt. Safe, held, seen." Lena traced her finger along the edge of the paper. "I remember everything." Jonas didn't speak. She wasn't asking for comfort. She was stating a fact. She'd carry it with her, just like he carried the memory of his sister, just like Samira would carry the choice she had made. Some memories didn't fade. They just folded into the shape of who you became. Lena pulled her knees up and rested her chin on them. "Do you think they'll try to take her again?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but not afraid. Just curious. Jonas shook his head slowly. "No. Not now. The court gave us their word, and Layla's still in our corner. They've got no case anymore." He reached over and gently nudged her shoulder. "You did more than any lawyer could, you know." She gave him a tiny smile. "I just told the truth." "Yeah," he said, "but you made them listen." They sat like that for a while. No rush, no reason to move. Eventually, Mira stirred. A soft sound, a little grunt followed by the stretch of her tiny fingers. Jonas stood and crossed the room, lifting her gently from the crib and settling her against his chest. She nestled in without protest, one hand gripping the fabric of his shirt. Lena watched from across the room, a quiet calm in her eyes. Jonas turned toward her. "Want to hold her?" She hesitated for a second, then nodded. He walked over and passed Mira into her arms with practiced care. Lena cradled the baby like she'd been doing it all her life. Mira blinked once, let out a tiny noise, then settled again. Lena looked down at her, then whispered something under her breath, too soft for Jonas to hear. He sat down beside her, resting his arm across the back of the couch. For a moment, they didn't say anything. Then Lena spoke. "Now you know right," she said, eyes still on Mira. "I stayed." Jonas felt something catch in his chest. He didn't try to explain it. He didn't try to reply with a quote or a lesson. He just nodded, because he did know. And it mattered that she said it. They had both stayed. In a city where buildings were still falling, where sirens still echoed some nights, where papers still decided who got to belong and who didn't, they had stayed. When it was easier to walk away, when the system had told them to step aside, when it would have been cleaner, simpler, safer to let someone else take over, they hadn't. And now, in this small room, with bad paint and a cracked floor, there was something whole between them. Not perfect, not fairy tale, but real, built out of choice. Mira shifted slightly, her small face pressing into Lena's arm. Jonas watched her breathe and thought about all the times he hadn't been able to save someone, all the orders he had followed, all the silence he had kept, and how none of that erased what they had done now. Lena whispered again, "She's heavier now." Jonas smiled. "That's what happens when you belong somewhere." The room grew quieter again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of breath, of memory, of a small, stubborn peace they had earned one act of defiance at a time. And for the first time in weeks, Jonas allowed himself to lean back, close his eyes for a moment, and rest, not because they were safe forever, but because they were safe for now. And that was enough. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. If you're still here listening, feeling, then you've just carried something with us, not just a child in a box, or a girl with no name, or a man who chose to stay, but the weight and beauty of choosing each other even when the world says not to. This wasn't just a story about survival, it was about dignity, about being seen, about the quiet rebellion of love in a system that forgets to care. If this story moved something in you, even just a little, we invite you to tell us, what did you feel? Where in the world are you listening from? We'd love to know who walked this road with us, whether you're across oceans or just around the corner. Every view, every like, every word of support matters more than you know. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, please consider giving this video a like, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who carries a soft spot for justice, for found family, for second chances. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for your empathy, your time, and your presence. This story may be ending, but the conversation continues. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay human, stay kind, and never underestimate the power of choosing to stay.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.